My name is Elizabeth Danis, and I am the chair of the League of Women Voters of Hingham. Welcome to our annual Warrant Review Forum. The League of Women Voters of Hingham is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active citizen participation in government. As an organization, we don't support or endorse political parties. We work to increase understanding of public policy issues, and we influence policy through our studies, member consensus, and then advocacy. In 2011, Hingham voters unanimously supported our League's Warrant article. This made the warrant available to the public 10 days after the January 20th deadline. The sponsors' names must also be included. We believe earlier access to the warrant allows citizens and boards optimal opportunity to research the articles, and it allows citizens to engage in the review process and ask questions at the various board hearings. Boards also benefit from earlier voter input. 6 years ago, we added the Warrant Review Forum. Tonight, we have provided for you the most recent copy of the Advisory Committee Status Summary. Please make note of the hearing dates so that you may attend those meetings. This document is also on the town's website for those at home. Our League also produced the Citizen's Guide to Open Town Meeting booklet, which is available here at the Forum, the Selectman's Office, the Town Clerk's Office, and the Hingham Public Library. If you are new to town, this is a practical way to learn about the legislative practice of your open town meeting. We hope to see you at town meeting on April the 22nd, and of course we always welcome new male and female members to the League. And now I would like to welcome and thank Advisory Chair Donna Smallwood, who will be reviewing the Advisory Committee process and address some of the articles that might be of interest. Donna, if you don't mind, could we hold the audience questions until the end, as we want to ensure that we are able to cover your full presentation.
Sure, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction, and I really appreciate the League hosting this meeting. This is the kind of civic education that the League is especially good at, and I really appreciate you doing it. Here's what we're going to be covering tonight. We're going to look at, there we go, the budget that we are considering for the year ahead. We're going to look at the warrant article process and calendar. We're then going to run through all the warrant articles, and then I hope I can help with any questions that you may have. But before we get started, I just want to tip my hat to the people that I've met getting ready for town meeting this year. We have a really amazing group of volunteers who work on town affairs and elected officials, all working toward the betterment of the community, and I think we're very fortunate to have them. At the same time, I want to just tell you how impressed I've been with the town employees that we've been working with as we've developed budgets this year. We have a very professional, dedicated group of folks working on our behalf, and I'm impressed with their work and their dedication. But as I'm tipping hats and offering praise, let me also acknowledge you in the audience and anybody who's watching at home. The kinds of folks who are interested in this kind of a meeting are the kinds of folks we like to have as volunteers in town. So just to shout out that the town's talent bank application, the equivalent of raising your hand and volunteering, is on the first page of the town's website. And I would encourage you to think about joining all of the interesting folks who are working on the town's behalf. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the advisory committee so that you can judge my perspective, you can understand how things look to me. We are a 15-member committee appointed by the moderator, serving up to 2 3-year terms. We function as town meetings study group or research committee. We do the deep dive into the budgets and the warrant articles, investing the time that not everybody who comes to town meeting may be able to do. As a result, our recommendations on the various warrant articles are usually the motion on the floor. It's where we start. But the ultimate decision is everybody that's at town meeting. We are just an advisory committee. So with that, let's get to it. AdCom, the advisory, those of us on the advisory committee call it AdCom. I'm going to slip and do that. We're responsible for developing a balanced budget for the town. So we look at the municipal budgets, we look at the education budget, and we look at the capital outlay budget. We try to understand the priorities and the challenges that each department is dealing with. We try to understand new mandates. We try to understand innovations that they would like to pursue. We also try to take a careful look at the financial implications, both in the short run and in the longer run. And that statement at the bottom, ideally the committee's budget recommendation reflects a consensus, balancing affordable cost with acceptable service levels. And we're always trying to find the middle ground between whoever is proposing something, the advisory committee and the selectmen. One other thing I just wanted to mention, Hingham has a AAA bond rating from all 3 of the bond rating agencies. I don't think when I joined the advisory committee, I understood what a big deal that is. Only 6% of Massachusetts communities achieve that. And it reflects in part our careful fiscal controls, and it benefits us. It means that we can borrow money at advantageous rates, and it means that even when markets are tight, we have access to funds. So it's worthwhile for us to continue to work hard to be fiscally wise in our management of the community and maintain that bond rating. When we take on budgets, we form subcommittees of the 15 members and send teams to work with each department head to understand the details of the budget. Department heads then come to the committee as a whole, talk to us about their mission, talk to us about their challenges, talk to us about how their work is changing. It's very interesting how the work of our public safety teams and our education teams are changing as our community changes. While we're doing that, we're trying to keep in mind metrics that the advisory committee over time has set for itself. And we use those metrics to try and make sure we're keeping ourselves on the right path. So for example, we discuss what we call unassigned fund balance. That is in effect the town's savings account, its rainy day fund. And we've set a policy that says that unassigned fund balance should be between 16 and 20%. As of last June, it was 24%. So this is good news. We have a strong savings account behind the decisions that we make. We also set a goal for ourselves of investing appropriately in capital. And we have said our capital funds should be between 2 and 5% of our operating budget. And last year we were at 2.7%. So again, a metric where we're on target. Finally, we have a metric for ourselves for debt service. We want to make sure we don't overextend ourselves. And we say that that we think it's a good idea for our debt service to be between 5 and 7.5% of our total annual expenditures. Last year it was 8.7%, so it's a little bit above the metric, but it's been trending down. It's trending in the right direction, and it is a metric that fluctuates over time, so we're reasonably comfortable with all of that. After all that good news, here's a little more troubling news. Our revenues are growing. We have more revenues every year. However, the rate at which our revenues are growing is slowing. So while you see from fiscal years 10 to 14, it was 3.5%. Now it's forecast over the next few years to be more like 2.6%. So revenue is increasing, but the rate of increase is slowing. At the same time that the rate of increase in our expenses is accelerating. This is not a good trend. These are conflicts that are conflicting trends that create pressures and challenges in us reaching a balanced budget. But I'm confident that we will get there. Here's a peek at what the budget proposal looks like at the moment. The proposal at the moment is just over $112 million. At the moment, that represents about a 5.1% increase over the previous fiscal year. When you look at the budget, see people. 75 to 80% of our costs for running the community are personnel costs. We are a people-rich service company, the town of Hingham. But I think the proportions are interesting. So if you look at the blue on the left side of the chart, that's almost 50% of the budget, and that's the education budget. If you look at the two pie slices that point toward 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock, if we thought of the chart as a clock, that's debt service and employee benefits. That's another 20% of the budget. And the last 30%, the multiple colored pie slices of a variety of sizes, are the general government budget. That's where public safety and DPW and human services and culture and recreation. So, you know, the big picture is 50% education, 20% debt service and employee benefits, and then 30% in municipal services. We talked about wanting to make sure that we invested appropriately in capital. This is things like new police cars and DPW trucks and making significant investments in our buildings and such. We anticipate this year's spending in the order of $2.4 million on capital, and that is it on track with what our goals have been in terms of appropriately investing in capital. Here's where we are in terms of the budget process. As of mid-February, which is the last time we did a forecast update, we're looking at a budget deficit of $1.18 million. We anticipate that the selectmen are going to make their recommendations on a budget next Tuesday, and that the advisory committee is going to vote all of its budgets, all of our recommendations on budgets, and get to a balanced budget next Thursday. But we have some work to do to find some resources to get to that balanced budget. I'm confident we're going to get there. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about budgets. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the town meeting process. When we get warrant articles come from a variety of places. They come from various boards, they come from the selectmen, they come from the Veterans Council, the Council on Aging, and they also can come from citizens. Typically in the warrant, we have a set of warrant articles that are perennial. We have them every year. We have a set of warrant articles that are driven by changes in state law of some sort. Then we have anytime we're going to spend money or shift money, that involves an article. So we'll talk tonight about articles involving money of various kinds. We We every year have an article on the Community Preservation Act projects, projects that are funded from a tax on our real estate taxes that help us do some really interesting projects. This year, there are 45 warrant articles. Last year, there were 35. So we have 10 more, and I think we have some meaty ones this year that you've probably been reading about in the newspaper. Typically, the selectmen hear warrant articles first, so that advisory committee can benefit from the nature of their conversation, and then we take them up. This is a little bit about the calendar, and what it's reflecting is sort of two parallel processes. So Elizabeth reminded us that town meeting is by statute the fourth Monday in April. So this year it's April 22nd. Mark your calendars. You might also want to mark your calendar for the 23rd, just maybe. So the first of the parallel lines is the budget cycle. It starts in the fall with budget assumptions and the development. The town department heads develop their budgets. And then beginning in December, from December to January, the advisory committee and the selectmen are hearing all of these budgets, and typically we vote them in March. The warrant article schedule is a little bit different. Zoning articles have to be in December 1st. I'm not sure why they're special, but they have to be in early. And then the remainder of the warrant articles are due about the third week in January. Elizabeth talked about the league's warrant article that required them to be available just 10 days after they're out. So in February and in March, both the selectmen and the advisory committee are looking at warrant articles, and everything needs to be wrapped up pretty much by mid-March in order to make all of the information available in the warrant and get it to us so that we can be appropriately prepared for the evening of town meeting. So we talked about budgets, we talked about the process, and now we're going to make our way through the warrant. So first up, let's talk about the 8 perennial articles. These come up every year. And they don't typically require town funding. So we, for the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund, we appoint a trustee for a small fund. For the Department of Conservation and Recreation, we're required as a community to accept liability for any work they do in town. So we say, okay, we'll do that every year. We accept reports from town committees and thank them for their work. We accept the report of the Personnel Board and its recommendations. That one's not up there. Okay. We fix the salaries of town officers. We accept a payment in lieu of taxes from the Hingham Light Plant. We have a revolving fund in the building department where all the building permit fees get put into this revolving fund, and then it's used to pay for department staff when they're doing inspections. There's a similar revolving fund for the senior center, where the program fees for the senior center all go into the revolving fund, and the fund is used to pay the expenses related to that. And we also allow the selectmen to accept easements, typically for utility work. In an earlier year in the advisory committee, I thought I was being smart and asked whether we could do away with some of these perennial articles. And I was reminded that it's not a bad thing for us to get together and get used to saying yes or no, you know, sort of get the ball rolling. So perennial articles are important. So 8 perennial articles. Oops, it would help if I change the slide. Here we go. Here we have 7 articles this year that don't involve funding of any kind. The first one clarifies that all of the South Shore Park up beyond Route 3 is included in designation as a priority site, priority development site. This qualifies that area for state grants and state marketing assistance. Town meeting in 2012 sought permission to offer that kind of a designation, and then in 2014 we designated this land, but it isn't clear that the designation was done clearly to include all of the property, and so that's what this article is going to accomplish this year. We are going to consider a new bylaw that would ban plastic bags. This is something that other communities have done, and we're going to ask town meeting this year whether the time is right for Hingham to do the same. The idea is to encourage the use of paper bags, but ultimately of reusable bags. So we'll see how we feel on that subject. We're also going to be asked to establish a committee to assist with the development of a master plan for Hingham. We'll talk a little bit more about the master plan later on. But the proposed committee would include representatives from a variety of the boards in town that touch development. Planning board, the industrial board, the harbor development board, a variety of those kinds of organizations, and several citizens. So there will be intensive citizen involvement, and the committee is meant to help drive and assist with that. We're going to ask ourselves whether it would be okay for the school administration to lease school buses and vans next year for 5 years instead of 3. Our friends in the school administration tell us that that's a perfectly acceptable life for these vehicles, and we can save some money by entering into longer leases. So we'll see whether we agree that that's a good idea. We're also going to consider whether we should use a streamlined approach when accepting subdivision roads as private ways. So they've been built in a subdivision, and are we going to accept them now as a town road? When that road has been reviewed under the town's subdivision control law, it would allow us to rely on assessor's records instead of doing full title searches, and planning board thinks that this would be an advantageous refinement, so we'll see whether we agree with them or not. We're going to clarify that a very small portion of Martin's Lane is actually in the public way as we try to fix the seawall down there. When they looked at the land records, there's a very small part where it isn't clear that it's in the public way, and so we need to clarify that in order to move ahead with the seawall work. Finally, we're going to ask ourselves whether we would acquire by gift or eminent domain the Canterbury Street Cemetery. This includes the remains, the graves of more than 14 family members of prominent early settlers. The folks who own the land now have no connection to those settlers, didn't know they owned the land, and haven't been maintaining it. So this would be a way to clear the title to the land and then be able to treat the cemetery with the respect that it deserves. So we'll see whether we think that's a good idea or not. We're also going to consider 3 different kinds of property tax exemptions in 3 different articles. There is already a property tax exemption for veterans, but it doesn't now apply to veterans whose property may be held in a trust. There was new state legislation last year called the BRAVE Act, which now makes it possible to extend the exemption to situations where the veteran's property is held in a trust. We'll ask whether we should adopt that. And if we do, Hingham anticipates that they'll receive a partial reimbursement from the state for each exemption that they might offer. That same BRAVE Act, for the first time, offered a property tax exemption for parents of soldiers who have died or are missing in action. And we will ask whether we would like to adopt that property tax exemption as well. If we do, we anticipate that we would receive a full state reimbursement for any exemption offered under that warrant article. The third one is a means-tested exemption for a certain group of seniors in town. Seniors who are 65 or older, who have lived in town 10 years or more. So the idea is to target some tax relief to long-term citizens who may be finding it hard to stay in their homes as, you know, as our community changes around them. One of the elements of the proposal is that we use a state criteria. The state offers a state circuit breaker tax credit for seniors, and so the proposal is that we would use that to indicate whether or not a senior qualified. If you meet the age requirement and you've lived in town that long and you were able to qualify for the state circuit breaker tax break, that would be the criteria to help the assessor department figure out whether you would qualify here or not. The selectmen would set the amount of the exemption each year and would identify the funding source. Next up is one of my favorites. Community Preservation Committee each year makes recommendations to us on projects that we should endorse from a surcharge of 1.5% on real estate property taxes along with a state match, although I will be honest and say the state match is getting smaller as more communities have figured out what a great idea CPA is. Hingham started this year with 1.3 million. We have in previous years promised to fund both the Heritage Museum and the purchase of the Laner property. So we take that money off the top, and we have set aside almost $172,000 for continued payments toward the Heritage Museum and $396,000 toward the purchase of the Laner property. That left about $725,000 for 8 projects. And here are the 8 projects. So CPC is recommending $50,000 toward the administrative fund that helps to fund the staff that keeps the committee functioning. $300,000 to the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust Opportunity Fund. The Affordable Housing Trust seeks to jump on opportunities to acquire homes that could be turned into affordable housing. And you can imagine that in this kind of a market, one needs to be able to move quickly. And so this provides them with a pot of funds that they can access quickly when an opportunity presents itself. CPC is recommending a grant of just over $19,000 to continue to restore headstones in the Liberty Plain Cemetery off Main Street. And if you haven't been there, it's an interesting and a comforting place to visit. So take a look. We're also, CPC is also recommending $121,000 for the restoration of mechanisms of 6 of the bells in the Hingham Memorial Bell Tower. I see my colleague Julie Straley in the audience, and she's this is her favorite project. We funded work on 4 of the bells last year. This will allow all of the bells to have their mechanisms repaired, refreshed. It was getting to be an almost impossible physical workout to operate the bells. They had not, their mechanisms hadn't been touched in years and years and years. So this will allow us to get the bell tower in proper operating condition. We'll also consider almost $30,000 for stabilization and foundation work at the Old Ordinary and the Annex. This is a very small piece of a much larger project, but this is what CPC thought that they could contribute this year. There's also a proposal for a $60,000 third-party consultant review of all of our athletic fields, including our tennis courts and our basketball courts. We're going to try to figure out how much we have, who's trying to use it, when they're trying to use it, how often they're trying to use it, and come up with a plan that would allow, fields need to be rested in order to stay healthy. They can't be used round and round and round. And so to get a handle on what we've got, how we're using it, and I wouldn't be surprised, and are we meeting the demand that we have for fields? So folks are enthusiastic about having an independent review of all of that. We'll be asked whether we would support $120,000 in contingency funding for the bathhouse. I rode by the bathhouse last weekend, and it's looking to me as if site development is ongoing and they're getting ready to do some foundation work. You'll remember that we have invested CPC funds in this project in the past, and we also received a state grant. But in the intervening years, as the construction market has changed, we have found ourselves in a kind of a hot construction market, and projects are costing more than they were originally predicted to cost. So the folks that are working on the bathhouse have done value engineering to try to, control costs, and they've gotten it down to the amount of money that was available, but with no contingency. And if any of you have done a kitchen or a bathroom, you know it's not a good idea to do a project without a contingency. So this is a 10% contingency on the project. We're also going to be asked if we would contribute $24,500-ish toward accessibility improvements at Plymouth River School. All of our schools are, I'm going to get this wrong, ADA compliant, but the state's AAB requirements, and I couldn't do the alphabet if I had to, are somewhat more precise. And as a result, all of the schools have had to do improvements to their playground facilities. And this is, again, a partial contribution toward the improvements that need to be made at Plymouth River. Okay, so we've talked about the perennials. We've talked about property tax exemptions. We've talked about projects that didn't involve funding. We've talked about CPC. Now we're going to spend some money. So these first 6 spending articles, 5 of them are perennials, and 1 of them is sort of a cleanup. So every year we hear a report from the Personnel Board. This includes salary increases and benefit changes and job reclassifications for municipal employees. We will vote whether or not to take money out of the stabilization fund to help to decrease taxes. This is money that came from the proceeds of town buildings in the past, and it's been held in a fund, and we take a piece of it every year to help to reduce taxes. We are also going to ask whether we would transfer money out of the meals tax stabilization fund. When we first started collecting meals tax revenue, we put it all in a fund and have released it over time. The bad news is we've depleted it. And so this year there will be less money to take out of this fund, and the fund will then be completely depleted, and we now have our meals tax funds all in local receipts. So we also every year establish a reserve fund for unexpected, unanticipated expenses in this fiscal year. That's typically the snow and ice, so everybody pray for not so much snow tonight so that fund doesn't have to be too big this year. And the last one is we need to pay $800 for a copier lease that we didn't get billed for 3 years ago, and because it came in so late, it takes town meeting. It takes a 4/5 vote at town meeting to pay this bill. Okay. Now here are some of the more interesting ones. So I'm going to run through 6 funding articles that don't include the biggies. I'm holding the biggies until the end. Okay. So we'll be asked whether we would endorse the country club borrowing $415,000 for golf course maintenance equipment. These are mowers and rollers and sprayers and other kinds of things that keep the club in good working order. This borrowing would be repaid to the town over 5 years from country club revenues. We'll also be asked whether we would tap fund balance, that rainy day account, for $195,000 to complete the design and permitting for the roadway improvements that we're talking about on Route 3A, sort of from Otis Street through the Rotary up to George Washington Boulevard and Muzzy's Corner. The way road improvement work happens on state roads is the municipality, Hingham, is responsible for all the costs for the design and permitting. And after Hingham pays all that money up front, you have positioned the project to then go to the state and seek state construction funding for the actual work. This takes a protracted period of time, but we heard from the town engineer the other night, and he is optimistic that with this additional money, we'll be able to complete the design and permitting and be in a good position to seek state funding. We're also going to be asked whether we would use fund balance to fund a third-party consulting firm to come in and help us do a master plan. We talked about the master plan committee earlier on. We last updated our master plan 18 years ago. Few things have changed in town in 18 years. You know, I think there are a lot of things that we would like to take a look at and just see where we are. Master plans involve intensive citizen involvement, because what you're trying to do is develop a shared vision for your community going forward, and then actionable steps that you can take to make that vision a reality. So will we think that it's a good idea to spend money on that this year? We're also going to be asked whether we should spend $500,000 that we would borrow to install a data and phone network. The reason that this is necessary is that when we first entered into a contract with our cable company provider some years ago, the cable company provided what's called the iNet. But we are watching that as these contracts come up in other communities, the cable company is withdrawing the iNet. And therefore, we need to have one. We need to have phone and data communication among all the town buildings, the schools, town hall, the fire station, whatever. So we certainly need this. But it also means that when we do it, we will be able to do it in such a way that we build redundancy into the network. The way the network exists now, if there's a car accident and a pole comes down, you can be out of communication. It could be that Plymouth River School can't be in touch with Town Hall, and that's not the way we want things to operate. So we'll be asked, is this a good idea? Will I be asked whether we would tap fund balance for $350,000 for extraordinary capital expenditures at Foster School? Foster School is 70 years old, and the community has been talking about what we should do next at Foster. We have applied twice for the state's funding program on schools, so far unsuccessfully. We're going to try again to seek a state grant. But in the interim, the folks in the schools, on the school committee, thought it would be a good idea to have available a pot of funding should something unexpected happen. Do we have a boiler problem? Do we have a serious roof problem that we didn't anticipate? So that the school can continue to be a safe place for our kids while we figure out the longer-term solution. We're also going to be asked whether we would endorse borrowing something over $550,000 to replace the glass block windows at the gym at the high school. Don't know if you remember, but when we were at town meeting last year, there was netting over those windows that are up high. Last year we had identified that there was a structural problem with the windows, but we weren't sure the extent of the structural problem. So last year we approved money to do design and investigative work. Now that work has been done, and we know this is the cost for taking care of the damage. The good news is this cost is lower than the bottom end of the projection from last year. So while it's a chunk of change, it's less than we thought it might be. So those were the 6 sort of not so unusual funding articles. We're going to be asked about whether or not we should dredge the harbor. We dredge the harbor every 10 years. We're not called Bear Cove for nothing. We last dredged the harbor in the 2009-2010 season. Harbor dredging is best done in the wintertime, both because the harbor isn't being actively used in the same way at that time and for environmental reasons. The last time we dredged, there was so much material to be dredged and it had gone on for so long that we needed an extension, and we had to do it over 2 seasons, and that doubles the staging cost. So the thought this year is get ourselves organized, get all the permitting in place, get the funding in place, with a goal of being able to actually do the dredging in the 2019-2020 winter. The cost of dredging the harbor is estimated to be $5 million. You don't know completely until you get there, but that's the current estimate. And and let me walk through the other articles first. So first we're going to be asked, would we create a waterways fund? The town currently has a variety of water-related funds and harbor dredging funds and whatever. But in order to qualify for state grants, one needs to have something called a municipal waterways fund. So we think it would be a good idea to create a municipal waterways fund. The second article says, should we take the dollars that are in all of these separate funds now and the dollars that we think will be generated this year and consolidate them all in the municipal waterways fund? If we think that's a good idea, there will be something just over $1.5 million in this consolidated municipal waterways fund. The proposal then is, if the dredging is going to cost $5 million, we would use 1.5 that we've accumulated over the years in the municipal waterways fund and borrow up to $3.5 million. At the same time, there are some state grants available, and we would do our best to get a state grant, but we don't know if we will or not. If we were successful in getting a state grant, it would reduce the amount that we need to borrow. So 3 harbor articles, and then 4 articles about the water company acquisition. And I'm going to tell you right up front that the advisory committee has not yet considered these articles. So I don't have the same level of detail because we just haven't gotten there yet. You probably know or have read that it is the town's right under the statute that established the water company in 1879 that the town can purchase it. In that statute, there was a formula that said, you know, if you want to purchase it, this is how you figure out what it would cost. Inquiring minds could disagree on the interpretation of that formula. And after several years of court activity. The court clarified how that formula should be interpreted, and the purchase price as of about now is $108 million. If the town were to decide that they wanted to proceed, that purchase would be financed through borrowing that would be repaid by the ratepayers. So not the taxpayers, but the ratepayers would repay that borrowing. So we will, I would bet, have a fulsome conversation at town meeting as to whether or not this is a good idea or not. Related to the acquisition is an article that would designate the selectmen as the board, as the water commissioners. This is a common model in other communities that have, that own water companies, that it is the executive branch that serves as the water commissioners. So we'll think about and discuss whether that's a good model for us or not. Other elements of the governance proposal are that the town would hire a water superintendent who would oversee the operation of the water company. I think there's also a proposal for one half of an admin person to assist the superintendent. So those would be the only town employees. The town would then hire a consulting firm to actually be the operator. There are firms that are in the business of operating water companies who are experienced at that, and the town proposes that they would hire a company to operate the water company, and that company in turn would hire vendors who would do any capital improvements, any water main work. The proposal also includes a citizens advisory board. If I remember correctly, it's 3 folks from Hingham and 1 each from Hull and Cohasset to advise on the operation of the water company. So one question is, should we buy it? The second is, should we designate the selectmen as water commissioners? We'll be asked whether we would establish an enterprise fund to run the finances of the water company. This is a technique that we use both with the sewer district, and we use it at the South Shore Country Club. And what it means is that all of the revenues and all of the expenses for the water company are kept together. They don't get merged in any way with the rest of the municipal financial operations, and it's a way to keep things clear. The budget for that enterprise fund is in development at the moment, but will be available at town meeting. And then the 4th article on the water company acquisition asks whether we would set aside, take from fund balance $250,000 for transition costs, for legal costs and engineering costs and consulting costs between now and the time that we make a decision to make an acquisition, and between the time that we would make an acquisition and have it fully in place, you know, have all the financing in place and all of that. And if that weren't enough, we also have 7 zoning bylaw changes, bylaw amendments to consider. These are typically refinements to our zoning bylaw. Some of them are driven by changes at the state level. Some of them are driven by the staff, the ZBA, or the planning board, who, as they implement the zoning bylaw, find things that we think we could do better within it. These are often highly technical, and I thank every day the subcommittee at AdCom that works with the planning board on these, because it is detailed work. It's detailed work. That is this year's warrant. Now, I have provided a fire hose of information in a very short period of time. So if you'd like to take a breath and find some more information, a reminder that On the town's website is an event calendar with a listing of all the board's meetings, their agendas, their minutes. You can see who's doing what when there. The folks in the audience have hard copy, and Elizabeth talked about the warrant article status summary that is posted on the advisory committee's pages on the website. We try to update that once a week to keep track of what articles we've heard, what we need to hear, and which ones we have submitted as final. Also on the advisory committee's pages is the 5-year forecast. This is a revenue forecasting document, and tries to keep an eye on what kinds of revenues we think we're going to have over time. Our calendar, and we have a link to Your Citizen's Guide to Participating in Town Meeting. We appreciate that the League has helped us out on that front. So, with that whirlwind dance through the warrant, I'm hoping I might be able to answer any questions that you have. And if I can't answer them, I want to observe that Lucy Hancock is in the room. She's a previous advisory committee member. Julie is in the room, also on advisory with me, and I'd like to tip my hat to Elizabeth, because Elizabeth's partner George is on the advisory committee with me, and that means that she is very patient with him being out many nights. So, questions that I might be able to answer. Yes?
Is this, the order that you went through, is that expected to be the order in which the warrant will?
No. The order for the warrant is not set yet. At the moment you have a warrant article summary, you can see that they're alphabetized. There'll be numbers at some point in the future, and I'm not quite sure when. Additional, oh, Lucy, no.
I have to make it work. Couple of things. There used to be an article that might have been pulled that was allowing the school department to re-establish the use of the $750,000 for the Foster School feasibility study. What happened to that?
The school committee voted on Monday night to withdraw that article. They have decided that they want to focus their energies on a vigorous run at seeking state funding. And if we are unsuccessful, we'll then see where we are and figure out what comes next. But that article has been withdrawn.
Another one.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about borrowing of all the projects you looked at, most of them are under, say, $3 million. Those, I assume, are coming from what we call non-excluded debt. They will be absorbed into the operating budget, paid for by other debt rolling off. So there's no need to have an override
Right.
or a debt exclusion. So the only debt exclusion we're talking about is the water company
Yes.
at this point.
Yes.
And we think that will not need to be a ballot item, or
That is what we believe.
because it's ratepayer funded?
Yes.
And doesn't affect 2.5?
I believe, I don't carefully know the answer to that question, but I do know that it does not need to go to the ballot. I'm not absolutely clear on why, because we haven't gotten there yet. Okay? Oh, you're letting me off easy, thank you. Elizabeth?
Just one question. On the enterprise fund that you were
Yes.
talking about, does the light plant fall, is that an enterprise fund?
That is not an enterprise fund. It's a different funding mechanism. But both the country club and the, so we don't see, when we don't see the light plants budget in the Article 6 budget. We do see a budget item for the sewer district and for the country club. We see both their revenues and their expenses, but not the light plant. Different model. Well, thank you all. I look forward to seeing you at town meeting. Appreciate it.